Well, one of the things that I'd like to talk about with you is I've been struck by the fact that there are so few men in this group, and what is it? I don't know. So I'm puzzled by that.
Yes. Because, yeah.
And I love the fact that we have, a strong community of women. But I'd like for us to have a strong community of men.
Men as well, exactly. And we have had it in the past.
Yeah. So it's just an interesting development that has surprised me.
Tom, you forget, church is for women. It's not for men. And that has been the standard from day one. The only time men participate, and that is church, and that is education, and that is business, is when they can be in power. Period. End of story. That's life.
Well,
just look at the world. If you don't have
well,
power, a man won't. If there's no opportunity for power, a man will not go in.
Oh.
Well,
that's the human condition.
Yeah. Well, that certainly resonates.
Why would you go in to be a servant? And don't give me Isaiah and suffering servant. That's nice in church, okay? And church is always been you have a man in power at the head, and all the work is done by the women. The fair linen, the coffee, the the church school, all of that is female.
But I remember, when I started seminary, there were 65 people in the MDiv class. It was then the Master of Divinity.
Yeah.
No, it was the Bachelor of Divinity, the BD. There were 3 women out of the 65.
Yeah.
So things have changed. Things have changed a lot.
Well, things have changed. Women are in leadership, but what happens? Look who's at the very, very top. And women are in a church, unless you're talking.
Welcome everyone to the workshop on what's the big deal about performance criticism. And what we're going to do in this workshop is to explore the difference that performance makes. What has happened in the last 20 years is that a whole new approach to biblical study has developed, which is called performance criticism. One sign of that is that there's now a series published by Whitford Publishing House of books on biblical performance criticism. And my new book, First Century Gospel Storytellers and Audiences, was just published in July and is the volume 17 in that series. And another one has just been published. So there are now 18 volumes in the biblical performance criticism series. And there is a growing interest in performance studies of the Bible. And so this is a new development that has had growing impact. Now, one of the reasons why it's developed is that there's been a recognition that the great majority of people in the ancient world were illiterate. And so the anachronism of our reading back into the ancient world, readers who are reading a text in silence, just like we do, is clearly an anachronism, is a reading back of our culture and our suppositions into the basic methods of biblical study. So what's happening is that the recognition is that most people in the original context of the Bible experienced it as part of an audience that was listening to a storyteller who would recite the stories from memory, or from a reader who would read the stories aloud so that people were able to experience them then as sound. So what I want to do in this workshop is to explore the difference that performance makes in relation to our perception and interpretation of a biblical story. And I want to focus on the ending of the Gospel of Mark, Mark 16, 1-8. And could everybody get a Bible so that you, would that be easy? And find Mark 16. So, no, not yet, Isaac. Thank you. So what I'd like for everybody to do, we're going to break up into breakout rooms for like 5 minutes. And I'd like for you to read the story from the Bible in silence, the way that we normally would read it. And then I'll give you instructions as to what I want you to do in the breakout rooms. So let's take time now for you to read Mark 16, 1-8, and so that you experience it as a text. Now, how many people do we have? Okay. Here we are. Could we do a 1-minute summary of what you found in talking about, exploring this? Our breakout room 1. Kate, would you want to summarize what we?
Yeah, I can give a quick summary. So we had Tom in our room, so it was mostly Carol and I talking with Tom, listening, but both Carol and I really like the Gospel of Mark, the ending of it. We like the openness of it, that it ends without really ending. And we're both very taken by the fear and the terror that it ends with. And where does that lead? What happened to the women after? It leaves more questions than answers. Does that sum it up, Carol?
Okay, room 2.
I think that was us, but I'm not exactly sure. Were we
Oh.
too, Sue? Okay.
Go ahead, Sue.
Anybody that's got anything to say, please do so. We just thought we probably didn't read it as well as they would have listened in the first century, because we kept having to go back and check facts. And so listening would have been far more intentional, and telling would have been far more intentional. And but we were certainly struck with the fear and the terror out of such a loving. They start doing a very loving, meaningful rite, and then they end up in terror and fear, and apparently totally disobedient because they were supposed to tell everybody and they didn't.
Right. Okay, room 3.
It's fantastical. Who would believe it?
Huh.
That's for the ending. And the beginning, the women do all the work. The men do the square root of 0. And they don't believe anybody who tells them the one thing that Jesus kept saying over and over and over again. They're utterly useless. And to this useless bunch of men, Jesus gives the commissioning.
Right. All right.
And the women have the balls. They go to a tomb guarded by Romans, to a body that's decaying, to give it a decent burial.
Right.
And what do the men do? They mourn and weep. Big
And
deal.
run
And
away.
these are going to be our church leaders? Not buying it, Tom. Not buying it.
Room 4.
I think that's us, Jen. But jump in, I'll start. We were noticing or experiencing some of the language or words. Of course, I felt like we focus on words more as we're reading, of the movement of this kind of always ahead of us. The sun is coming, rising up, and it will fall again. Jesus is going ahead of us. There's this kind of anticipation of something always coming and rising. And then we did start to get to kind of the emotional language in it, that we wondered if hearing it, reading it is different than if we would feel it differently if we heard it than versus just reading the words. And
We'll get
also
to
if
that.
we would even remember half the words as you're hearing it versus staring at a word.
Right. Good. Okay. Well, a brief summary of the history of interpretation of this ending. Probably the majority of Markan scholars over the decades of the 20th century have concluded that this could not have been the ending. That the other gospels end with the notice of an appearance and of some, explicit confirmation of the resurrection. Mark does not, and there's been a recent book by Clayton Croy called The Mutilation of Mark's Gospel, where he summarized recent research, and his conclusion is that the only way to explain this strange ending is if the original manuscript, if the front page, which was the page for a codex, got torn away, and so the original beginning, and especially the original ending, was lost because of the loss of this text, of the page of the text. So there have been a whole variety of explanations of how this ending could have developed, that Mark fell asleep as he was copying, that the original manuscript was in some way lost or destroyed, but there has been a lot of efforts to explain this because it simply didn't make sense that it would end with the women saying nothing and without an appearance, which was the rest of the Gospels have. Now, the problem with the reading of the text in this way is that we now recognize that it was not read in silence, but was rather told. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to tell you the story, and then that we break out again and talk briefly about what this story means as a story that was told by a storyteller. So this is the story. When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome went and bought spices so that they might go and anoint his body. Getting up very early on the first day of the week, they went out to the tomb as the sun was rising. And they were saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the door of the tomb?" And looking up, they saw that the stone had already been rolled back. Now it was a big stone. And going into the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right hand, clothed in a white robe, and they were amazed. He said to them, "Don't be amazed. You're looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who was crucified. He's been raised. He isn't here. Look at the place where they laid him. But you go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he said to you." But going out from the tomb, the women fled, for trembling and terror had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone. Okay, let's go to our breakout rooms again and explore, how did it sound? What do you think the meaning of this was for the original audiences of the Gospel of Mark? So again, a quick summary. What did we think? Carol, maybe you could summarize from group one. You're muted, I think.
Yes, I think I'm right now. We were struck again. For me, it was when Tom told it, I heard, go and tell the disciples and Peter, almost a separate person, someone not a disciple, it seemed to me, when I heard it, Tom tell it this time. And we were also talking really about the terror of the women. And Tom was reminding us of Nero, the persecution of Christians at that time, and how terror would have been very appropriate. So their silence was part of all of the implications of being associated with Jesus and having seen the violent death of Jesus only 2 days earlier. So I think that summarized our conversation. I did put in that it occurred to me that I heard a speaker the other day talk about how sometimes, so Mary Magdalene, I went off on a track thinking that Mary Magdalene perhaps should have been Pope rather than Peter. I wondered why Peter was an extra rather than a disciple. So that's because I'm Catholic and, you know, I'm thinking those things. Over to the other group.
Okay, group two.
I will share for our group. We found when, opposed from reading it as opposed to listening to you tell it as a story, different things stood out for us. Like we could feel like we were there, like, we could feel like, here I am, I'm one of the women walking to the tomb, and it felt like I was part of the story. And so that was a difference from reading it. And also, we noticed, like, with your intonation, like, you emphasized different things and it made us pay attention, like when you said, and it was a very large stone, and it's like, well, why was that so important to, and what about these first century Jews that would maybe understand that to be, would know the significance that we don't know, so, and why was it put in there that was so large? So it kind of made it raise a lot of questions for us to dialogue with the text,
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, it was good.
Okay, group three.
I think that's us. We talked about
Boomer.
the authenticity of hearing it rather than reading it, because that's how it would have originally been shared, and that brings an authenticity when you hear the inflection and the tones and the life that it brings to it, rather than just seeing it flat in black and white on a piece of paper. We talked about that. We talked about, again, the rolling away of the stone. I'm trying to think, what else did we talk about, Jean and Elaine?
Oh, the words coming alive.
I knew I'd forgotten.
It was, and I mentioned a line from a hymn, which I don't know, I can't remember the name of because it's a newfangled hymn from not from Common Praise. And it's the line is the living word of God. And this becomes, the text becomes alive. And we also talked about your angel. You have a kind of a socks and sandals angel there, Tom. I would have had Dudley from The Bishop's Wife deliver that. Yeah, my idea of an angel is Cary Grant. So, but that's just me. That's just me. But you see,
all these years that I've worked with this story, I've never and told it. This is a new take on.
well, you see, that's the other thing. You're delivering an important message. So who is doing the delivering? What does he look like? What do, how does he sound? Yours
Yeah.
to me sounded like he had socks with his sandals. And
Yeah.
I would have infinitely preferred Dudley from The Bishop's Wife. But that's just me, eh? Italian Catholic, you got to deliver it in a good suit and Ferragamo tie.
All right. 4. Group 4.
Well, I can start, but Jeff and Shelley just pipe in. One point that we were mentioning was, of course, the words sound. We are engaged with the words differently when it's spoken, but also it's how we're hearing those words in this moment in time. And so the hearing means that in the present, people would be engaged in that present moment. So the performance would be important, and also the audience, and it wouldn't always be heard in the same way, which is rather interesting, just because of what we just heard about the tie and the suit. But it wouldn't always be told the same either. And then we started chuckling because we wondered if there was kind of some humor in this, in that the person who's telling this is telling it after the fact, and they already know that the story's been told to people. So we wondered, would there be a chuckle there and saying, you know, and the women didn't tell anybody, you know, inside joke. Of course they did, because we know it, kind of a thing. Then I didn't get a chance to say this, but in the Celtic tradition, people learn a lot by heart, because they used to. They gathered around the fire, and then someone might be called on to recite the prayer, or tell the prayer by heart, or the piece of scripture by heart, because that in that culture early on, that's what they did. And I can think about it being embodied. So anyway, Jeff or Shelley, anything you want to add?
Well, I guess I could just add that I did find, I was wondering how familiar they'd be with the entire story of Mark, and noticing that they're being told to go back to Galilee, which was the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
And so it becomes this, like, keep telling the story over and over and over and over again.
There are many indications from a study of the story as performance that it was told all at one time, and that so it's a 2 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes to tell the whole gospel. That was not unusual for long poems. The Iliad was regularly told. It took about 12 hours. So long stories were not unusual in the ancient world. It was an evening's entertainment. So it is, I think, quite likely that that the gospel was told as a whole, and that they would have experienced this then, yes, as a reference back to Galilee, and as the place of origin for the stories. Yeah. Well, the original medium of the story then was sound rather than text. And so I was going to indicate what difference, what's the big deal about performance criticism? It is that there is an experience of a different Bible. I've been doing some, brain research, books on the structures of the human brain, and there's been a lot of research now about the psychology of sound and the psychology of sight, and that each of those systems has a different physiological structure. So just to summarize that as quickly as I can, the processing of sound begins as a disturbance in the air that becomes waves of particles, and those waves strike the outer ear, and that vibration then moves in and out, starting movements in a set of tiny bones, the ossicles in the middle ear. They're the smallest bones in the human body, and together they weigh 4/10,000ths of an ounce. So their function is to transmit the sound waves across the barrier from air to water. And the equipment of the tiny inner ear is filled with fluids that take the vibrations that come from the waves of particles in the air and transform them into little waves in the inner ear. One of the things that's interesting about that I find is that there are two different places in the inner ear, and one has what would be called seawater. It's very salty. The other one is more like what would be normal water. So there's a difference between the seawater in one part of the inner ear and regular water in the other part of the ear. So those fluids then transmit nerves and vibrations to the auditory cortex of the brain. And so the vibrations of sound are processed in the temporal lobe of the cerebrum. And these pathways are duplicated in each ear. So that's happening right now with each of you, that your ears are processing these vibes through sound. The vision perception is a completely different system of perception. The sensory perception of light begins in the retina, and it's composed of 3 parallel layers of nerve cells that are arranged in rows of axons and dendrites. And the first layer in the front of the eye is primarily ganglion cells. The second level is amacrine cells. And the third layer at the back of the retina is 120 million light-sensitive neurons that are cones and rods that operate at different speeds and activate different signals depending on the level of what's happening in the sight. One of the things I find fascinating about that is that there is a place right in the middle of the cerebrum that is only activated by the sight of a baby's face. So there is a specific cell that is activated by the vibes of a baby's face. And so if you notice a new baby, you can observe that, how delighted people are to just look at a baby's face. So while these two systems interact with each other at various intersections in the brain, they are highly differentiated. And so in terms of what we're talking about with performance criticism is that literally it's a different Bible if it's processed through the eyes versus if it's processed through the ears, if it's processed as sight or as sound. So the difference is the difference of a different sensory experience, a different set of sensory data that is present when we study it as sight, as a text, versus when it is told and experienced as sound. So part of the big deal is that then a performance of the story, a performance of parts of the Bible creates then each a different experience than happens with the reading of a text. Now, another dimension of those differences is, and I'll name three. The first is that there's a performer. That is, it's experienced as coming, the sound Bible is experienced as coming from a person rather than from a text. And the vibes of the relationship to that person creates a higher degree of intimacy, of connection with the story, because each performer brings to it a different dynamic. It's because of the face, because of the presence of the storyteller. And so a performer is then present with a sound Bible. A second dimension is memory. The performance of biblical materials by a performer requires a degree of memory. It may not, there might be a text present, but in order to read the text, you had to have mastered and remembered significant parts of it. I'm a pianist and an organist, and for difficult things like the Vidor toccata, you have to, in order, because the notes are going so fast, you can't look at them at each note. You have to memorize the basic patterns and build into your practice muscle memory. So right now I'm working on the Rhapsody in Blue, and there are parts of that that you can only do if you know it by heart. There's no way that you can look at the manuscript and see that. So memory is another crucial dimension that is different. What's happened with biblical scholarship and biblical study has been that the text has become the focus of attention and has eliminated the need for memory. So a dimension of this is the recognition of the mnemonic structures that are built into the stories that make them easy to learn. So they were composed to be remembered. A third dimension is that in the telling of the story, there is an audience rather than an individual sitting with the text. So the audience, the dynamics of relationship between the storyteller and the audience creates then a degree of interaction that is simply not present with the text. a specific dimension of audience interaction is that in the telling of the story, the audience is addressed as various characters. So in the case of the resurrection story, the storyteller addresses the audience as the women. So the men have disappeared, but the women are the ones who are present, and the audience of the story is addressed as then Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome. So there are various stories and audiences that of characters to whom the audience is addressed through the gospel. So there are a number of things that are teachings that are directed and addressed to the audience as disciples. There are interactions and speeches that Jesus makes to the scribes and the Pharisees. So audience address is another major dimension of the impact of a story that's performed that is very different and has not been a part of biblical research at all. So I've found, and in my in this new book, a focus is on the audiences that are addressed in the story. So a last thing is, let's show Isaac the text. I have a sound map of this story. So this is the sound map, and because of time, I won't go into a lot of detail about this. The screen, I can't move it. They said nothing to anyone. The last line is, "For they were afraid." This is a sound map that is organized by the cola and periods that were the characteristic composition technique in Greek literature, specifically Greek rhetoric and drama. But what's being found is that these indications also indicate the character of the sound. So the sentence, the colon, "Now it was a big stone," is a short colon. "He isn't here. They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid." And what happens at the end is that the cola gets shorter and shorter. So that's an indication in this sound map of the story that indicates the character and speed of the story. So to answer the question, what's the big deal about performance criticism? It is that it's a different way of perceiving and communicating the Bible as sound rather than as text. So it's it's a big deal that is only beginning to be realized. And the work of the Network of Biblical Storytellers has given credibility to performance criticism, because people prior to the development of the network regarded the possibility of the telling of the stories as a kind of laughing stock. I remember that from 40 and 50 years ago. So that's the pitch of this workshop, is that it makes a big difference what you are all doing in learning and telling these stories. It's literally a different Bible than is the case with the text. So any last questions? Go ahead, Jan.
Well, I was just thinking as you were saying this, because obviously it makes a huge difference about the telling, but when we're preparing for
You can
telling.
stop this screen share, Isaac. Go ahead, Jan.
Well, when we're preparing for telling, we're using the site. It just struck me as interesting that we're reading the passage, we're putting it into either a sound map or the phrases so that we can learn it according to whatever. So in a sense, I don't know, what are your comments about that? I know it's, yeah, we're preparing by looking as well as saying.
Right. Well, we are as a community embarking on a new journey of exploration and discovery in relation to how to represent the sounds of the stories in a manuscript. Musicians do that all the time. Music composers, write down a composition in notes, but then those get played. And so the way that we are currently primarily approaching the Bible is as if, for example, we were to take the manuscripts of the operas of Mozart or the compositions of Bach and study the manuscripts and never make the sounds, never play the music. So what we are doing is we're playing the music of the Bible and rediscovering and re-exploring its character as sound and its original dynamics. So
And there's an interaction, right? There's an audience there, so
That's
that
right.
makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference with musicians too, I've noticed.
Yeah, that's right. Well,
What's the
Can I
name?
put in an ad, please, for the next session by
Sure.
Ray Bodie, Heart to Heart Script Preparation? Because Ray will teach you how to do all of this. She is a voice coach. She's done Hollywood, she's done Toronto, she's done New York. She knows how to get the words across, and she talks about embodying text.
yeah,
To build on this, you go to Ray for the nuts and bolts, because you will get the actual hands-on how to do it from Ray, and you will never regret it. You will use her information for the rest of your life if you're interested in doing this work.
that's great, Jean. Well, I'm very interested.
Ray is the best.
Yeah,
Ray is the best. And you want to talk about blessing? This group is blessed to have someone like Ray. Truly, truly, truly. If you liked my delivery in Acts, I come from Ray. And I cannot do any biblical preparation without her, because she makes performance criticism come alive. Go there, 3:30. Be there or you'll regret it.
well, that's great, Jean. Good ad. Well, thank you all. Last question?
Tom, this is Elaine. What's the name of the new book?
It's first century Gospels, storytellers, and audiences. The Gospels as performance literature.
Is it out yet?
Yep.
Okay.
I have,
Speaking of commercials,
I have a copy right here. There it is.
Is there an oral copy?
No. Well, actually, no.
You're it,
There was
Tom.
conversation about doing that, about, making a recording. I made a recording of Mark's Passion narrative in English and in Greek. That is at tomboomershine.com.
Oh, no, sorry, no, it's at Messiah of Peace.
Oh, wrong address. So anyhow, that's a start.
Tom, could I just say that this has been another shot in the arm. I need to do a workshop with you every year at least, just to remind me how important it is that what we're doing, it's not a hobby or it's not a sideline, that we have to be much more passionate about putting it into the mainstream of our churches if we can. As I think I might have mentioned, I'm Catholic, so that's harder than most, but nevertheless, it's given me a renewed insight again. So thanks. Wonderful to listen to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much for participating in this workshop, and I appreciate your patience and your participation. And yes, I would encourage you all to be aggressive about pursuing both your own research and trying to learn and tell as much of the things as you can. So to tell the stories every week in liturgy is a good idea.
Yeah.
So
another commercial is to listen to Go Tell every week to hear the lectionary from Tom and Amelia.
Yeah.
It's very good.
yes.
So if they're not on your newsletter, webpage, whatever, they need to be, because it's great every week.
And it's Go Tell Communications. It's gotell.org, right?
It's on YouTube. Well, send us an email and we'll put you on the list. Although we haven't done, yeah. This week's might be a little late. Here, let me.
Anyway, thank you so much, Tom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Appreciate
bless.
All
it.
right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Lovely to talk
everybody.
to you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.